Donald Trump versus, well, just about everybody. The president took the world stage today addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The speech he gave was, shall we say, light on diplomacy.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? For now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. Both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Best-selling hat. Trump was right about everything. And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything.
I don't say that in a braggadocious way. I was just right about everything. Let's get off the sidelines and head into the arena. Our panel is here, along with CNN chief international anchor Christian Amanpour. Christian, so much to dig through. Which one of these doors would you like to open?
Well, Casey, look, it is the most incredibly important moment right now. It's 80 years since the UN was created in the ashes of what happened in World War II. And since then, America has led the world. And what Trump is actually basically saying is, world, I don't need you. If you want to help, fine, but we can do it ourselves. And more to the point, we're retreating anyway. And as we retreat, we're also going to be doing quite a lot of destruction in the fact that they have cut so much to the really good things the UN does in terms of all the humanitarian arms, and with its USAID cuts has amplified all of that sort of retreat of US soft power. So that's one thing at a time when it's really, really necessary for the United States to add its weight to where it can really make a difference. People are actually dying because of these cuts. Wars and other crises are going on unimpeded because of a lot of these cuts. That was obviously the beginning of the administration and the Elon Musk taking the axe to USAID, but transmitted also into the UN. On the other issue, of course, war in our time is at a terrible, terrible height. He said that he's solved about 7. You know, there's a lot of dispute about that. The real wars that are really taking a huge amount of US, European, NATO, Middle East attention are Israel's continued war on Gaza and Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine. Up until now, President Trump is essentially elected to say a few things about Putin or sometimes, you know, Netanyahu, but never to put the weight of the presidency behind, you know, leveraging that weight to stopping these wars and to getting those leaders to actually listen to the U.S., who has the unique leverage. Today, he did say things to President Zelensky and to the assembled press about what he would be willing to do. He said that, yes, given Putin's provocations, escalations, testing NATO, he did think NATO countries were perfectly entitled to shoot down flying objects, including Russian planes, if they strayed into NATO territory.
Can I actually stop you there? Because we have that soundbite.
Oh,
I'd like to play it for everybody, and then please, we'll pick it up on the other side. Let's watch.
The biggest disappointment, but I think that'll happen eventually, is the Ukraine and Russia situation. But we've settled. I thought that was going to be the easiest one because of my relationship with Putin, but unfortunately, that relationship didn't mean anything, unfortunately.
So there you have it. What do you take away from that?
Well, it's another construction. He said a few other things when he was with President Zelensky. You know, he kept giving Putin yet another deadline, but also acknowledged that Zelensky had really been fighting like his people. The Ukrainians had fought really, really valiantly to not collapse under the consensus that, you know, Ukraine was going to collapse or have to capitulate when Russia invaded. The question really is, what happens next? Words are one thing. It's good that he had a good meeting with Zelensky, unlike the one in the White House many months ago. That's good. It's good that he says that US and NATO should challenge the repeated tests that Russia is making to their, you know, to the NATO alliance. On the other hand, on other big issues, he basically said, as you played, you're all going, your nations are going to hell because of untrammeled immigration. And then he went on about this gigantic green energy hoax and peddled a lot of conspiracy theories from that very important international platform, and said that all those nations were going to fail by trying to ameliorate what is actually climate change that's having a destructive effect on our planet. And he was denying the science and bigging up those conspiracy theories. So that was on the negative side.
All right, Christian Amanpour, really appreciate your reporting today from New York. Thank you so much for being with us. All right, our panel is here. CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes, the political reporter and author Molly Ball, former Deputy Special Assistant to President Biden, Dan Coe, is here, along with former Republican Congressman from Michigan, Peter Meyer. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Congressman, I would like to start with you just in terms of this United Nations speech. And we should also mention, for those of you who, in the last week or so, we've debuted our text chain here. There's going to be additional analysis, reporters in there. We're going to let them do their thing. If you're watching on mute, it'll be great for you. If somebody says something that jumps off our screen, we'll read it here. But otherwise, we're going to let them do their thing. But Congressman, the things that we heard from the president in this speech, I mean, was, I feel like we say a lot, like it's Donald Trump unleashed, but this is a new version of this president for this second term. I mean, what was your reaction to how he conducted himself there?
There are plenty of elements that wouldn't be at all, out of character for a campaign speech, or where you hear at one of his rallies, the regurgitation of the greatest hits. But he said two things that I thought were important to note. One, the difference between, empty words, and that's not how to solve wars. It's going to be action. And then number two, a pretty stinging criticism of the degrowth mentality that I think has taken over Europe. And the two are very much linked. He talks about the energy sanctions against Russia, but at the same time, how much the European Union continues to buy their oil. And you have Germany continuing to shut down nuclear power plants funded thanks to green groups that are funded by Putin, on the one hand. That degrowth mentality is terrible for Western democracy. It's terrible for Western economies. It is fantastic for China, they are embracing growth left, right, and center. So enough of those empty words that in those cases lead to actions that are detrimental to the West. And on the other hand, willing to take action. I mean, he talks about the wars that he solved, and is there some hyperbole? Is there some exaggeration? It's Donald Trump, of course.
The wars are still being fought, correct?
They are, but what he's trying to do, and then I think this doesn't get covered, is looking for a tangible, articulable American interest in those conflicts, right? The mineral deal in Ukraine, the mineral deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. If you have something tangible, that can actually last across administrations versus rhetoric and high-minded thoughts that easily get swept out with the changing of the guard.
How do you see it, Dan?
I mean, look, I think this was a microcosm of one of the signatures of Donald Trump, which is when he's on the big stages, he can't help himself but to air grievances and lie, right? He started by criticizing the decor of the UN, saying that he could have done a better job, criticized the escalator that he was going off of, and then he just spouted off 4 lies in a row. He said grocery prices were down, they're up year over year. He said inflation was defeated. The goal of the Fed, it's still 30% above that goal. He said D.C. was the crime capital of America. Crime is at a 30-year low in D.C. He even talked about going out to dinner and how many more people are going down to dinner when reservations are down in D.C. So this is just an example of what Trump does when he has the big stage. I think as a reality TV star, he likes the imagery of going after countries while they're sitting there. But my question is, what kind of impression of the United States does this leave on the world? I think it's a pretty poor one.
Molly Ball, I mean, look, to kind of pick up on one of the points the Congressman was making, I'm not sure there are a lot of Americans who necessarily believe that the United Nations is terribly effective. And to a certain extent, Donald Trump was channeling that when he was standing on that stage. Now, he was focused on very Trumpian things, and Kristen, you can weigh in on this as well. I think he was also upset his teleprompter wasn't working, right? Like, doesn't meet his standards. But I guess my sort of big picture question is, does it matter?
Well, look, on the one hand, plenty of presidents have advocated for reforming the UN, and the sort of physical decrepitude of the UN building is a vivid metaphor for an institution that a lot of people do see as not succeeding in keeping pace with the needs of the world in this moment, although, as Christian pointed out, much of that is because of things that America has done. I think at the same time, you know, you mentioned, Congressman, the distinction between words and actions, and I think that that is something that world leaders are accustomed to at this point, of seeing Trump's actions as far more significant than anything he said. And to that end, nobody needed this speech to know that America was pulling out of or radically reconfiguring the liberal world order, right? That is something that has been demonstrated to all of the leaders in that room in so many ways since the start of President Trump's second term. So for him to get up there and say it just sort of puts an exclamation point on something that I think all of the leaders in that room have already felt on a very visceral level.